The endocrine system. Once we've completed talking about this system, you should be able to describe the general function of the endocrine system, describe a hormone and the effects it can have on a target cell, list two general types of hormones and describe how each works, list and briefly describe the general mechanisms of hormone action, discuss three types of stimuli for hormone release, and here's the biggie. List the major endocrine glands, the hormones produced by each, the effect the hormone has on the body, and the pathology involved in hormone imbalance for each. There's no way around it, folks. This one is straight memory work. But let's get started. The endocrine system is a group of glands that is scattered throughout the body. The word endocrine means ductless, so these glands make hormones, chemicals, that are secreted directly into the bloodstream. The endocrine system functions to coordinate and control cellular activity. Now, the nervous system does the same thing, but the endocrine system works much slower and has much longer lasting effects than the nervous system. When the nervous system controls a cell, it's pretty much instantaneous. It tells the cell to do something, then it quits telling the cell to do something faster than we can even think that. With the endocrine system, it may take minutes, hours, days for the hormone to have its effect, and the effect may last for minutes, hours, days, weeks, months. It may go on for a long time. Now, hormones are chemical messengers that travel in the blood. The nervous system communicates with neurotransmitters, but they just travel a short distance across a synapse to get to their target cell. Hormones have to travel in the blood. The hormones can be either based on amino acids or they can be steroids. Now, steroids are made from cholesterol. Either one will produce long-lasting effects on the target cell. A group of chemical messengers called prostaglandins are sometimes referred to as local hormones. They have a longer lasting effect than a neurotransmitter, but they are produced by cells and travel only a short distance to get to their target cells. Now, all of these come from the same fatty acids, so they're lipid type structures. Prostaglandins play a role in inflammation, localized blood pressure, pain, some of those kinds of things. The hormones we're going to be talking about are these major hormones that are either steroids or amino acid based. Since hormones travel in the bloodstream, they go to every single cell in the body, but only certain cells respond to the hormone, and these are called target cells. In order for a cell to respond to a hormone, it has to have a receptor for that hormone on the cell membrane or someplace in the cell. When the hormone attaches to the receptor, it changes the metabolism of the target cell. The kinds of changes that can occur in the cell as a result of hormone action include altering membrane permeability. In other words, sodium gates may open or close, or some other ion gate may open and close, allowing ions to enter or leave the cell. The hormone may cause protein synthesis to start. Since proteins are enzymes and enzymes control all of the chemical reactions in the body, if an enzyme is made that wasn't being made before, then the cell has a new chemical reaction going on. Some hormones simply activate or inactivate enzymes that are already present in the cell, again changing the metabolism of the cell. Some hormones stimulate mitosis so that we increase the number of cells in a structure, and other hormones promote the secretory activity of a cell, causing them to manufacture some product and then secrete it to the outside. Because there are two types of hormones, there are two types of hormone actions. The steroidal hormones, since they are lipid soluble, can diffuse right through the cell membrane. Remember, anything that's lipid soluble just passes right through the cell membrane. The steroidal hormones will enter the nucleus where they bind to the receptor that's inside the nucleus. This hormone receptor complex we think is a transcription factor. That is, it binds to the DNA and activates a gene. Since genes cause the production of protein, this causes a new protein to be produced. The amino acid-based hormones, however, have to bind to a receptor on the cell membrane. They can't get through the cell membrane. Now, binding to the receptor on the cell membrane starts a chain of reactions inside the cell that ultimately activate an enzyme inside the cell. This enzyme will activate some sort of second messenger, and it's the second messenger that alters the cellular metabolism. So here's a couple of examples. Steroid hormones are lipid-soluble, pass right through the cell membrane, through the cytoplasm into the nucleus, where their receptor is located. When we have this receptor hormone complex, it can attach to the DNA, causing a gene to be expressed as messenger RNA, and we get protein synthesis, a new protein. The non-steroid hormones, that is the amino acid-based hormones, attach to a receptor on the cell surface. This causes a series of reactions leading to the development of some sort of second messenger. Now, cyclic AMP is a very common second messenger, so that's the one they're showing here. And cyclic AMP can activate enzymes, unactivate enzymes, can do a variety of things inside the cell, just depending upon what cell we're talking about. Endocrine glands can be stimulated to release their secretions through three mechanisms. One is a humoral mechanism. That is, some substance in the blood triggers the release of a hormone. Some hormones are released as the result of neural stimulation. That is, a nerve goes into the gland and stimulates the hormone release. And some are stimulated by hormonal stimuli. That is, hormones from one gland stimulate hormone release from another gland. An example of humoral stimulation is the control of calcium in the blood. Blood calcium levels control the release of calcitonin from the thyroid gland and parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid glands. We'll talk more about this later. Nervous stimulation is strictly that of the adrenal gland. Remember that the sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight mechanism, and that one of the neurotransmitters in the sympathetic nervous system is norepinephrine, which is very close to adrenaline or epinephrine. Your sympathetic nervous system can only act for a few seconds. So when you are about to be hit by another car, for example, you're pulling off campus and a car is coming right at you, you have this reaction that's just enough for you to stomp on the brakes and control your steering. That's your sympathetic nervous system. But the activities that go on after that, if you think about it, your heart races for a while after that. If you've just had something to eat, it seems to sit in your stomach for a while. That's because part of that sympathetic nervous system effect was to send some impulses to the adrenal medulla, because the adrenal medulla releases epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, the receptors for epinephrine and norepinephrine in your body don't care whether that came from a nerve cell or from the bloodstream. So by releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream, you maintain that sympathetic response for a long period of time. And then finally, hormonal stimulation is what we see a lot with the hormones from the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus causes the pituitary gland to release a whole set of hormones that stimulate various glands within the endocrine system. The pituitary gland at one time was called the master gland because it seemed to control many of the glands in the endocrine system, but then we found the connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and really the hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland. There are several endocrine glands in the body. We have the pituitary here in the base of the brain, and the thyroid and the parathyroids located here in the neck. The adrenal gland sits on top of the kidneys. The pineal gland is also in the brain, and the thymus is here in the mediastinum. Now these all pretty much only have an endocrine function. The hypothalamus is also located in the brain. We've already talked about its function in the brain, but it also has a role in the endocrine system. The pancreas also is dual duty. It secretes digestive enzymes, but it also secretes hormones. And the gonads, that is the ovaries and the testes, are of course part of the reproductive system, but they have cells in them that also secrete hormones. So some of these structures are found as part of more than one system in the body. Let's look first at the pituitary gland. Now the pituitary gland acts like two separate glands. There is an anterior pituitary that is controlled by the hypothalamus, and hormones from the anterior pituitary control many of the other glands in the endocrine system. The posterior pituitary gland is really a storehouse for some hormones that are made by the hypothalamus. It doesn't really manufacture any hormones of its own, but it stores and then releases neurohormones from the hypothalamus. Let's look first at the anterior pituitary and a few of the hormones it releases. One is growth hormone. Now, growth hormone targets pretty much every cell in the body, but particularly muscles and long bones, stimulating them to undergo mitosis so that they grow. If there is an oversecretion of growth hormone during childhood, you can have gigantism. People are over 8 feet tall, very long bones, lots of muscle tissue. An undersecretion of growth hormone in childhood leads to dwarfism. People are seldom taller than 4 feet, but they are normally proportioned. They're just short. Now, if growth hormone is overproduced in adulthood, you get a condition called acromegaly. With acromegaly, only certain bones can respond to growth hormone. The bones of the hands and the feet and the jaw are the only ones that can really respond. So these people get huge hands and feet, and their jaw grows out. Their frontal bone can also respond, so they get a misshapen face. Of course, there are other problems. It's seldom that the pituitary only oversecretes one hormone. So usually there are other problems, other endocrine problems that go with these conditions as well. Another hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary is prolactin. Now, prolactin is involved in stimulating and maintaining milk production when a woman breastfeeds. However, men also make prolactin. And prolactin, in both men and women, has been termed the cuddle hormone. This is the hormone that may have you have soft, fuzzy feelings. I mean, if you think about it, babies are really a pain, and parents do not kill them no matter how big a pain they are, primarily because this prolactin makes them protective. Adrenocorticotropic hormone is a hormone that stimulates the adrenal cortex to develop and produce its secretions. And thyroid stimulating hormone does a similar thing for the thyroid gland, allows for the thyroid gland to grow and develop and to secrete the thyroid hormones. Gonadotropic hormones regulate the activity of the ovaries and the testes. There are two, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And both of these stimulate the development of the sex cells, the eggs and the sperm, and help maintain the reproductive organs so that they can produce these cells. A hyposecretion of either of these can lead to sterility. Now, the hypothalamus is part of the brain, but it does regulate the anterior pituitary. It secretes a group of hormones that are called releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones, so that they cause the pituitary to release gonadotropins or to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, or they inhibit the release of those hormones. The hypothalamus relies on negative feedback. Let's say, for example, that the hypothalamus produces a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone. This stimulates the pituitary gland to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid gland to release its T3 and T4. As T3 and T4 levels go up in the blood, the hypothalamus picks up on this, stops producing thyroid releasing hormone, so there's no longer a signal to the pituitary gland to release thyroid stimulating hormone, and so the thyroid gland is now not stimulated to produce T3 and T4. Those levels drop and we start all over again. The neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus actually produce hormones as well, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. The posterior pituitary stores those hypothalamic hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Now, oxytocin has an effect on the muscle in the uterine wall, causing contractions, which is important during labor. Also, it controls some of the musculature in the breast for milk to be released. Antidiuretic hormone acts on the kidneys, causing you to retain water. Additionally, under extreme conditions, the antidiuretic hormone may cause blood vessel constriction to help increase blood pressure. For that reason, ADH is sometimes referred to as vasopressin. Now, when you ingest alcohol, it inhibits antidiuretic hormone. So if you're doing a lot of drinking, you may find that you're spending a lot of time in the bathroom urinating because water is going right through you. You're not paying attention to some of the signals that you need to retain water. The next morning you may have a hangover with a powerful headache. Most of that headache is because of the dehydration that occurred because of the suppression of antidiuretic hormone. Now, if antidiuretic hormone is decreased, you have a condition called diabetes insipidus. And in diabetes insipidus, its blood sugar is not a problem, but it's simply that you keep water going through you all the time, and so you keep pretty dehydrated. Here you see the hypothalamus and its connection to the pituitary gland. The anterior lobe is affected by the releasing hormones from the hypothalamus, but the posterior pituitary gland stores the ADH and the oxytocin. Thyroid gland is located in the neck, and it makes two different types of hormones. It makes calcitonin, which is involved in decreasing blood calcium levels. You can think about calcitonin tones down the level of calcium in the blood. And this is controlled by humoral stimulation. That is, if calcium levels go up, calcitonin is released to help bring down calcium levels. The other hormones produced by the thyroid gland are thyroxin, or T3 and T4. These are your metabolic hormones. They stimulate metabolism. Thyroxin, T3 and T4, need iodine. So this is why you need a little bit of iodine in your diet. Now, some of the diseases of the thyroid gland include goiter. Now, goiter is typically seen where there is an iodine deficiency. Without iodine, you can't produce T3 and T4. So your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland keep sending those hormones that tell the thyroid gland to secrete or grow. Thyroid stimulating hormone also causes the thyroid gland to grow. And if it can't secrete, then it starts to grow. And you see this tumor-like growth here on the neck. We don't have problems with iodine deficiency in this country anymore because they iodized salt. Prior to that, you would see goiter sometimes in the Midwest because our chief source of iodine in our diet is seafood, and the Midwest is not known for its oceans. Cretinism is what occurs if T3 and T4 is secreted in inadequate amounts in childhood. Since you need an active metabolism for the brain to grow, for muscles and bones to grow, for anything to grow, these children tend to be dwarfs, and their brain doesn't develop, so they're also mentally retarded. Myxedema is what you see when thyroid hormone production, T3 and T4, is reduced in the adult. Here they develop a thick, slimy kind of mucousy stuff that gets in the tissues, causing an edema or a swelling of the tissues. Also, since metabolism is slowed, they gain weight very easily. Both cretinism and myxedema are simply treated with thyroid hormones. Graves' disease is one of the more common hyperthyroid conditions. You have an overproduction of T3 and T4. This is going to ramp up your metabolism. These people lose weight like nobody's business. They're nervous, they have tachycardia, they're very hot all the time because their metabolism is so high, and they tend to get a condition called exophthalmos, where their eyelids retract and their eyes appear to bug out of their head. This woman is not holding her eyes open. This is what they do when she's relaxed. Her eyeballs are bugging out. In order to treat this, you have to kill off some of the thyroid gland. A lot of times they simply kill off all of it. They use radioactive iodine to do that, and then these people are given thyroid hormones the rest of their lives to maintain normal metabolism. The parathyroid glands are located directly on the thyroid, and they produce PTH, or parathyroid hormone. Now, parathyroid hormone helps the osteoclast of the bone to break down bone to release calcium into the bloodstream. If you have hypercalcemia, too much calcium in the blood, calcitonin is released to help bring the calcium down. That's from the thyroid gland. If you have hypocalcemia, not enough calcium in the blood, then parathyroid hormone is released so that we go to the bone, pull some calcium out, and increase blood calcium. Now, calcium is required for muscles to contract properly, including the heart muscle, and for nerves to respond like they're supposed to. Now, here is an example of the negative feedback mechanism that's involved in calcium homeostasis. Normally, we want about 9 to 11 milligrams per deciliter of calcium in the blood. If that goes up, calcitonin is released. We deposit calcium in the bone until we bring the calcium levels back down. If calcium gets too low, the parathyroid gland secretes parathyroid hormone. The osteoclast gets busy degrading bone and return that calcium to the blood. So this is a constant seesaw. Now, at one time, when they treated people for goiter and they removed parts of the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland sits so much right there on the thyroid gland it can be hard to distinguish. They would sometimes take out the parathyroid glands as well as the thyroid gland. And people would die shortly thereafter from a condition called tetany. Without appropriate calcium levels, the muscles spasm, and in particular, the muscles of the larynx would spasm. You would get laryngospasm, and it would spasm so much that it would cut off your airway, so they would die of asphyxiation. They now are more savvy about where the parathyroid glands are and tend not to take them out. The adrenal glands sit on top of the kidney, and it acts like two glands. There's an adrenal cortex and an adrenal medulla. Let's look at the adrenal cortex first. The adrenal cortex makes 3 types of hormones. One is the mineralocorticoids, and the one we'll pick out to talk about is aldosterone. There are others, but aldosterone is the primary mineralocorticoid. Aldosterone acts on the kidneys, having it conserve sodium. Now, wherever sodium goes, water follows. So if we're saving sodium, we're also saving water. That water ends up in the bloodstream, so this is going to increase blood volume and thus increase blood pressure. Another hormone made by the adrenal cortex are the glucocorticoids, things like cortisol and cortisone. These are your anti-stress hormones. They promote normal cell metabolism even during times of stress, and they do what's called glucose-sparing activities. In other words, they make your body use fats and proteins in metabolism instead of glucose. Your body doesn't know when you're under stress when you're going to get to eat again. And since your brain must have glucose to function, it saves the glucose, even though you may be taking in plenty of glucose in your system. It saves all of the glucose to feed your brain and uses fats and proteins, your muscle tissue, to fuel all of your other metabolic activities. Cortisone and cortisol are also anti-inflammatory. You may have had them used to treat rashes that wouldn't go away. They use them to treat rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory type diseases. And the adrenal cortex makes a small amount of sex hormones called androgens. Androgen means male producing. Now these androgens appear to be produced throughout life. It could be that these androgens help kick off puberty. If they are produced in excess, it can cause virilization. Now, in a male, it may cause precocious puberty. They may just simply go into puberty a little sooner than they would normally. In the female, however, it causes heavier musculature, facial hair, deepening of the voice. Androgen excess would help explain the bearded lady at the circus. Now, some of the diseases of the adrenal cortex include Addison's disease. Addison's disease is a hyposecretion of the hormones of the adrenal cortex, particularly aldosterone, and to a certain extent cortisol. With Addison's disease, they do not adequately save sodium, so they have low blood pressure, and they also don't respond well to stress because of the glucocorticoids. President Kennedy had Addison's disease. It's sort of amazing that he lived to be 42 and get assassinated. Without constant medical intervention, he would have been dead much earlier. Hyperaldosteronism is when you produce too much aldosterone. This means that regardless to any signals being sent by your body to the adrenal gland, it makes aldosterone, saves sodium, saves water back as a result of saving the sodium. So you have hypertension and edema. And Cushing's syndrome is a hypersecretion of the glucocorticoids. Now remember, your glucocorticoids help you respond to stress, but they also screw around with your metabolism. So people with Cushing's syndrome have hyperglycemia, so they have excess glucose in their blood because they're using fats and proteins for their energy. As a result, they have muscle wasting, and they redistribute some fat in some interesting places. Now, this is a picture of a woman just as she's being diagnosed with Cushing's syndrome and after she's had it for a while. Notice that her hair has really changed its consistency. This is not the result of a bad perm, but rather the result of her body using protein as part of its metabolism. Your hair is all protein. You can't see it, but her legs would also be little skinny bird legs instead of normal looking legs because those muscles would have wasted away. And here you notice a little deposition of fat. This is called the buffalo hump that is very consistent with Cushing's syndrome. And you can't tell from her face so much, but because of a lot of edema, her face has become round. It's what's called a moon face. She has a lot of edema in her face. Now, this can be caused because the adrenal gland goes awry, or if someone is on corticosteroids for treatment, for an anti-inflammatory, using it as an anti-inflammatory for long periods of time, they will also develop these same characteristics. The other part of the adrenal gland is the adrenal medulla, and it secretes the catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are your fight or flight hormones because these are your fight or flight neurotransmitters. The adrenal medulla, as I mentioned earlier, is stimulated by nerves from the sympathetic nervous system. So whenever your sympathetic nervous system is triggered, so is the adrenal medulla, releasing these chemicals into your bloodstream so they can keep the sympathetic nervous system reactions going for long periods of time. The idea is to help the body prepare to meet short-term stresses. You almost have that automobile accident and you need the immediate reflexes to stop, and then you may need a little more stress kind of stuff to give you the strength to get out of the car or do some other things. However, if you're under long-term stress, you can do a lot of damage to the body. Remember that the sympathetic nervous system slows down digestive system activity, giving you problems there. It keeps the heart rate up and the blood pressure up, giving you problems there. So long-term stress is not really a good thing to deal with. The pancreas is one of those dual duty organs. We're going to look at the endocrine function now, looking at the two hormones that are produced. Insulin, which helps lower blood sugar by moving the glucose from the blood into the cells so it can be used for metabolism. and glucagon, which increases blood sugar by taking glucose out of storage in the liver and putting it back in the bloodstream. When you have hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, glucagon will be secreted to increase your blood sugar. So there's enough blood sugar to fuel metabolic activities in your cell. If you have hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, then insulin will be secreted to move that glucose from the blood into the cells so it can fuel metabolic activities. Imbalances of insulin and glucagon lead to a disease known as diabetes mellitus. Now, diabetes mellitus is characterized by what they call the three polys. Polydipsia, which is excessive thirst, polyuria, which is excessive urination, and polyphagia, which is excessive eating. Even though people with diabetes mellitus have hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, it's because none of that glucose is getting into their cells, and so their cells send out signals that they're starving, so these people tend to eat a lot and gain weight. Here again we see that negative feedback mechanism. We want to keep our blood glucose about 90 milligrams per deciliter. If it goes up, insulin is secreted. We store the excess glucose in the liver as glycogen, and we move some of the glucose into the cells so that it can be used. Glucose goes too low. Again, the pancreas secretes glucagon. This causes the liver to break down glycogen to glucose to release it into the bloodstream to bring the blood sugar back up. The pineal gland is a little gland in the brain that secretes the hormone melatonin. We're not totally sure what this hormone does, but it seems to play a role in our sleep-wake cycles. And the thymus is a gland located in the mediastinum between the lungs. It secretes a group of hormones known as thymosins that are involved in maturing the immune system. Now, the thymus is relatively large in children, but atrophies in adults. So apparently this gland's function is necessary in childhood, but not so much in adulthood. The gonads, the ovaries and the testes, are also dual-duty organs. The ovaries secrete estrogen, which helps develop the secondary sex characteristics of the female, and estrogen is secreted by the Graafian follicle, the area where the egg is developing. And then progesterone works with the estrogen to prepare the uterus for pregnancy. And once the egg is released from the Graafian follicle, the structure that's left behind is called the corpus luteum. And it is the corpus luteum that produces the progesterone. The testes secrete testosterone. And testosterone also causes the secondary sex characteristics to be produced in men, the deeper voice, the facial hair, those kinds of things. And it's secreted by a group of cells in the testes called the interstitial cells. And testosterone stimulates the sperm-producing cells to produce sperm, as well as helping to maintain the male reproductive system. Now, there are other organs in the body that do dual duty. When we look at the digestive system, we'll find that the small intestines and the stomach make some hormones that help control digestion. The heart actually makes a hormone that helps control blood pressure. The kidney makes a hormone that helps produce red blood cells as well as control blood pressure. And then the placenta is a temporary organ that helps exchange materials between the mother and the fetus in utero, but also produces some hormones. The placenta makes a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin. This is the basis for pregnancy tests, but it actually stimulates the corpus luteum to continue producing estrogen and progesterone, which is necessary to maintain the pregnancy. The placenta also produces a hormone called human placental lactogen, which prepares the breasts. It stimulates breast growth, which is why pregnant women tend to get rather large breasts, some of which stays with them after the pregnancy goes away. And it also produces relaxin toward the end of the pregnancy. Relaxin actually relaxes the pubic symphysis and some of the ligaments and tendons of the hip joints, so that during birth you can have a little more flex to allow the baby through the birth canal. As we age, there are effects on the endocrine system. All of the secretions from the endocrine glands seem to decline slightly as we age. We do know that there is less growth hormone produced, and some people think this may be what contributes to the muscle loss that goes along with aging. Women lose function of the ovaries in late middle age, going into menopause. Overall, we're less able to resist stress and infection as we age, which probably is an indication that the adrenal glands stop out a little bit. Older people are often mildly hypothyroid, frequently not enough to be treated, but just enough that it takes a few fewer calories to maintain their weight. What they were eating 10 years ago now seems to have them put on a pound or two. There is some decline in insulin production, and type 2 diabetes is much more common in older people. Let's test your knowledge. The endocrine gland that regulates the release of hormones from the pituitary is the thyroid, hypothalamus, parathyroid, or the thymus. And of course, the hypothalamus is the one that controls the pituitary gland. A homeostatic imbalance involving hormones of the pancreas would be cretinism, diabetes insipidus, diabetes mellitus, or dwarfism. This one is diabetes mellitus. Remember, diabetes insipidus is because of ADH imbalances. Cretinism is a reduction in thyroid hormone in infants, and dwarfism has to do with growth hormone.